Hi, my name is Ruby, and I'm so excited to be sitting down with Christine Caine today and get to spend some time together chatting. So let's go ahead and dive in to our first question. So Christine, you get to travel the world, and you get to travel around to a lot of different expressions of church and of faith. So what sticks out to you about this younger generation, my generation, Gen Z? What sticks out to you about them? What is inspiring you? What are you learning from them?
You know, Ruby, I am so fired up. We've just done a lap of the globe. So I've been all over Europe and then Cambodia and Thailand and Pakistan and Mexico City. And I'm like, God is moving amongst Gen Z, that younger generation. It makes me excited for two reasons. Number one, I am a mum of Gen Zers. So I've got a 20-year-old, I've got a 16-year-old. But no matter where I go, what I'm seeing is that there is a hunger in this younger generation for authentic Christianity,
Absolutely.
for authentic relationship with Jesus, and a real desire to see his kingdom come here on earth as it is in heaven. And it's expressed differently in the countries that I've been to, but I've done youth gatherings and had the privilege to speak at different youth gatherings in all of those places. And there is one thing that is common. I mean, there is a desperation, a sense of like, our world is spiraling out of control.
Totally.
We need something bigger than ourselves to intervene into this, but we don't want religion. We don't want culture wars. We want a radical encounter with a living God that's going to make a difference in my everyday life today. And I'm seeing that wherever I go. So I was sitting there. I spoke at a chapel just a couple of days ago, and I watched the young people enter in to worship. And it was like it did something in me. You said, what are you learning from them? And that raw, unadulterated, I just want Jesus. That's what I think that I see in your generation.
Absolutely. I would agree with you. I see this longing, this hunger for something, and maybe they're not sure exactly what it is yet, but they're open and they want Jesus. When they do it, they dive head in.
Yes, that's what I see.
That's exactly what you're saying, and I love that. So as we look at Barna's research and learn more from them, they revealed that there were some kind of gaps between what people view Jesus as and what they're viewing Christians as. There's somehow a gap between those two. So how would you describe that? How can we reconcile that gap as these leaders for this young generation?
I'm not saying that the disparity hasn't always been there, because of course, humanity is always humanity. So, I want to say that it's not that there is necessarily more hypocrisy now. It's more obvious now because of the internet, which means that we as leaders have got to be, we always should have been aware, but there is a new level of awareness that goes, hang on a minute. Anything I do, anything I say, it is inevitably going to be out there. Therefore, if there is a disparity between what I profess to believe and what I really, the way I'm really acting, it's going to show up really, really quick, and kids can smell it. Well, I'm talking to you, which is your generation. I know it from my own kids. Even if I wanted to think, that it really doesn't matter. Oh, it does matter. I think where kids, young people, perhaps start to think, this thing is not real. If they go, well, you know what? You say that you're a loving person, but you're full of judgment. Something comes on the TV and you're full of negativity. Or you say you trust God, but I see fear in your life. You say you believe the Bible, but I hear you on the phone and you're gossiping, or I read your Twitter feed, or I read young people are not going to read your Twitter feed, but I'm going to look on TikTok or Snapchat, and I'm going to see, that you're slandering people. They're going to go, what? As if you really believe the Bible, or, you seem really sexist in your comments, or man, that was a really racist way to think, or racist thing to say, or that's really homophobic. Well, I know my own daughters will see through that in a heartbeat, and they'll go, wow, Mum, good Christian you are. You're supposed to be loving. It is amazing to me how many non-Christians actually know how Christians should be living. And it is amazing how many Christians expect non-Christians to live like Christians when they're not even living like Christians. And so the one thing that I do know for sure is that this is not an era where you can say one thing and act another way and think you're going to have any credibility.
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
it's just not going to fly in this generation.
Yeah, and I love those practical examples that you gave of when you're sitting and watching TV, you're slandering someone, those super practical ways. So what would you say to a leader or an adult that when they mess up, they let something slip, like how do they show that vulnerability to the teens that they're leading, and how do they apologize or show them, hey, I'm not perfect, I mess up too, and keep that vulnerability? How have you done that?
I think that's a great question, because we have to have humility. And it's so funny, sometimes when you're the leader or you're the adult, you think you're above humility. And yet in Philippians, Paul writes that Jesus did not consider it robbery to be equal with God, but he humbled himself. Humility ought to be a trademark of a Christian. I know with my own daughters, and particularly my second born, who is 16, she lets me get away with nothing. And so, even if I'm in the kitchen and she'll say something and I'll make a comment that I haven't really thought through, and she'll just go, Mum, that is, now whether that might be, Mum, that's really judgmental. You don't know that. And I've got to, in that moment, I go, you know what, Soph, you're right. It actually really was. That was judgmental. That wasn't right. I didn't have all the information, and I'm really sorry. I'm going to do better. And honestly, I think time will tell, but I really think that 10 years from now, when she's in her mid-20s, it's going to be those moments that she remembers more than anything. And when someone maybe one day is interviewing her, she'll say, it wasn't, my mum was a good preacher, but that's not really where I found Jesus. It was when my mum in the kitchen would say, I'm really sorry, Soph. I'm really sorry. I own the fact that I was judgmental, or I was negative, or I was critical, or that, I need to think through that a little bit more and not be so sharp with my tongue. Yeah. Because I see in those moments, I can see in my own daughter a shift happen where she tends to listen to me more down the track about other things, because I've owned my weakness and my error in that thing. And I've asked her plenty of times, I've said, will you forgive me? That was wrong.
Yeah, and that so speaks to me and my generation is I want to follow a leader that's willing to say, you're right, I messed up, I'm sorry. Yeah. And to own up to their mistakes and have that transparency, and it's consistent. You're continuing to do that in your daughter's lives and people you're leading. That's the kind of leaders that we want to follow.
Yeah.
So as we see that disparity for those teens with the reconciling who Jesus is, but also who Christians are, and it doesn't seem to add up, can you speak to us? Who is the real Jesus? Who is the one we should be following?
Well, I think that's a great question. And in this era, it's important that we go to the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and go, who is this Jesus? Because depending what country, and people are listening to us, this conversation from all over the world. And, every country's got a different political system and a different social system and a different moral system and a different economic system. And so oftentimes Jesus is filtered to young people through those lenses, and through a cultural lens and environmental and political and sociological and all of those things. And I have found the best thing we can do is go to the Gospels and go, who is this man? And then when someone introduced me to the Word of God, now let me just say, when someone introduced me to the Bible, it was always, I had never even known a woman could read it. But when they did introduce me to it, and then they introduced me to Jesus in the Gospels, and I began to read about this man that so loved people, so included people, was full of forgiveness, was full of mercy, was full of grace, and yet never compromising. He always spoke the truth, but it was the truth in love. Yeah. And I could see that tension. I thought, this is a Jesus that talks to women like me, women that have been abused, women that have been marginalized, women that other people would not include in their community, women that had messed up. And I thought, he didn't ignore them or condemn them or judge them. He loved them and included them and embraced them. And out of that came transformation. And that is the Jesus that I encountered that changed my life. So he took this unnamed, my birth certificate doesn't have a name on it. It says child's name unnamed, number 2508. This unnamed, unwanted, abused, adopted chick from the back of Sydney, Australia. When I encountered that Jesus, my heart was transformed. And it began a journey where, as I got closer to him, shame started to fall off, guilt, condemnation, and I started to want to be more like him.